Hello and welcome to the Telegraph Studios. I'm Alistair Grinner and today we're talking about how the UK pension changes are affecting those people who live abroad. And joining me is Mark Kiernan from Bowl & Co, who's an expert in the area. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, we hear a lot about the changes in UK pension law and how that affects everyone here. We don't hear much about what's happening to people living abroad, or expatriates or expats as we know them.
Okay, so the first thing is it's not just British expatriates. It's also those people who have lived and worked in the UK and returned to their home country. So, for example, doctors, nurses would be the typical example. And in terms of planning for this eventuality, it's important that you start to plan early so that you can get a successful outcome in relation to lower taxes, etc. long term. If you don't plan early, then we're looking at potential tax disaster ultimately.
What about some of the other specific issues that affect them?
Let's take an example. A couple of years ago, we had a client called Jonathan approach us. He was a Hong Kong resident, aged 45 at the time, and a pension pot in the UK of around £500,000. His criteria was to look to minimise his taxes going forward, and from that perspective, he was looking at income tax, death planning taxes, and the size of his pot going forward and the lifetime allowance in the UK.
So let's take them one by one. First of all, income tax.
So from an income tax perspective, in Jonathan's case, for example, if he remained in a UK pension scheme, because Hong Kong doesn't tax overseas pension income, he would be subject to UK income tax at source, potentially up to 45%, whereas by transferring that scheme to an alternative jurisdiction, he could reduce that tax charge.
And taxation on death?
And tax on death, if he remained in a UK scheme, then he would be subject to tax on death on a lump sum distribution of 45% if he died after the age of 75.
And finally, the pension pot.
So from a pension pot perspective, our key concern there is a lifetime allowance. In the UK, that has been reducing both in real and actual terms now, and so we need to really consider how we best plan for that. Obviously, Jonathan had 20 years to retirement. His pension fund was worth around £500,000. So from that perspective, if Jonathan did the transfer now to an overseas pension scheme, he would benefit by the test against the lifetime allowance being done now, and therefore any tax charges which may be associated at longer term would be significantly reduced, if not eliminated totally.
One of the most commonly discussed topics regarding pensions is freedom and choice that we're given, so we have more control over our pensions. Is that freedom of choice still available to people who move their pensions abroad?
Well, it's interesting the UK has really gone first on this, and I think we know it's very much a watch and brief from the rest of the world to see whether they follow suit as well. In an example of Jonathan, he's just got to keep a watch and brief to see whether changes in his jurisdiction apply, so he can also do the same flexible access as he could for UK schemes.
So coming to Jonathan, if he does make this move and takes his money abroad, how does he actually go about that? Is there like a mechanism to be able to do it?
The UK government introduced what we call QROPs, which is Qualifying Recognised Overseas Pension Schemes. And through that mechanism, effectively, an individual who lived overseas could transfer their UK benefits to another jurisdiction without tax consequence at the time of transfer.
Tell me a little bit more about QROPs, and also how does somebody go about finding one?
Well, I think Jonathan would need to engage with his financial advisor within his country of where he lives.
And where would he find such an advisor who would know about QROPs?
Well, the easiest place to look for those types of advisors is the internet, to do some Google searching to have a look, and obviously to do some investigation on the advisor you're going to use, make sure they're a professional firm, preferably regulated, and have the relevant qualifications to give that kind of advice. So the advisor would look at Jonathan, look at his financial situation, not just at his pension, but also the other aspects of his life, and ensure that in giving us advice that he considers all the aspects of that to ensure that a QROPS is relevant and appropriate for Jonathan, for what Jonathan would need long term effectively.
And what about the QROPs themselves? Are they, the providers of them, are they regulated?
I don't think that necessarily all the schemes themselves are regulated, but certainly the people who operate the schemes, the trustees, they are generally regulated by a financial services type organisation. But if you're looking for ultimate regulation, somewhere like the Isle of Man, for example, that has a dedicated pensions regulator which regulates pensions schemes themselves, trustees and administrators. So that would be the most secure and safe environment to domicile a scheme.
When is the sort of time that you should be looking at these kind of questions to ask?
So I think with anything in terms of pensions, it's always good to start to plan early. You could start planning before you left the UK if you knew you were leaving, or you can plan, as soon as you've left the UK. But certainly, you need to start to plan for these things as soon as possible.
Now, in our conversation, you've mentioned Isle of Man, you've mentioned Hong Kong, Gibraltar. Where do you get the most interest in QOPs from?
So most of our business comes from the Far East, Middle East, and Europe. I think we've members in probably 60 countries around the world. So, it's a global business. The single biggest sort of jurisdiction, I think, would be Australia. That's where most British people expatriate to.
Well, you've given a lot of food for thought there for expats to think about. Mark Kinnan, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.